Can you guess what tune I'm playing right now is? Oh, I think you do know. I think you know, or think, what an apt choice of music. Good show, Sisyphus Orianus. This is the Blade Runner Blues track that was orchestrated by Vangelis. Famous music you hear with Pris walking down the alleyway halfway through Blade Runner. And other various parts. Anyway, you get to see Philip K. Dick's Penultimate Truth. Goody, goody, goody. Best part is, it begins now. Enjoy.
In March 1974, Philip Kindred Dick, a science fiction writer, went through a series of extrasensory experiences that remain unexplained to this day. The subject himself later referred to these events as an encounter with God and used it as a storyline for some of his novels. You have been entrusted to determine the true nature of these events. At present day, the writings of Philip K. Dick have reached considerable levels of popularity for what was considered a cult writer, and many of his stories have been adapted to films such as Blade Runner, Total Recall, and Minority Report. Gentlemen, the future circulation of his work will be based on the results of your investigation. We will start at the beginning.
The subject of this speech is a topic which has been discovered recently and which may not exist at all. I may be talking about something that does not exist. Therefore, I'm free to say everything or nothing.
He was born in 1928, which was really in the middle of not quite the end of the Big Depression in this country. So his mother was poor, lucky to have a job. And of course the death of the little girl certainly had a tremendous effect on Dorothy too.
They had been born about 2 months early, and they were both very small. And at the time, Phil was one of the smallest premature babies to survive. But his sister was even smaller, and she simply did not make it.
He thought that she should have lived, and he died. He thought that he was living at her expense.
Dorothy couldn't afford very much milk for them, and Phil was always so hungry that she gave him more than she gave to Phil's sister. So Phil felt in some ways that it was his fault that his sister died.
And at the same time, he developed a personality in his mind about how she would be if she had lived. And into that personality, he injected all sorts of things from what we call the feminine side of his personality. He actually drew her picture several times for me. But the pictures, they looked a lot like him. It was like him on a diet.
He felt a connection with what might have been. And since a lot of his writing has to do with the nature of reality, I think that had a very strong effect on him. What might have been. The changing information which we experience as world is an unfolding narrative. It tells about the death of a woman. This woman, who died long ago, was one of the primordial twins. The purpose of the narrative is the recollection of her and of her death. The mind does not wish to forget her.
I can see him in my mind's eye. I can see him as he was then. Sick quite a lot of the time. He was a sickly boy. We went to grade school together at Hillside School in Berkeley. I wasn't aware of any mental problems, but I was aware that he was quite a strange boy, and I liked that.
He lived with his mother. Dicks were divorced. Father lived in San Mateo, and Mrs. Dick, I don't think I ever saw her fully clothed and vertical. She was always first day in bed early in the evening.
I only remember seeing his mother in the kitchen once, and she was making a melted cheese sandwich. And if I think of it, I never saw him eat anything. And that's strange, because, you know, kids that age are eating all the time and drinking all the time. And then I saw her feed the cat sometimes. But never got into a good conversation with him.
In the early 1930s, young Philip and his mother Dorothy settled in Berkeley, California. It is said that his mother encouraged Philip's early interest for literature. But it is also undeniable that the intellectual environment of the city of Berkeley had an impact in the child's development.
I know that Philip was writing in high school, and that he wrote short stories. And early on, he had a little story published in the local newspaper, which had a column for kids' stories. I have never seen that story. I would love to see it. I don't know anything about it except it was a science fiction story.
Started having a lot of anxiety attacks going to high school, sweats, palpitations, shortness of breath. They considered it anxiety. Now we probably would think more panic disorder, panic attacks, and those are different. Started to write science fiction to disassociate. That was his word, to escape.
The question of when Phil and I discovered fantasy, I think we first discovered it in comic books. Here's a classic. We were all comic book collectors, and we went quite quickly from comic books to pulp magazines. At that time, there were a great many cheap fiction magazines, and Phil and I were both collectors.
Oh, we were both nerds. We both sort of liked classical music so much. And he had this great advantage of living in a strange arrangement with his mother. His mother lived upstairs, and the downstairs, the living room, with a huge Magnavox. And we had that to ourselves every afternoon and into the night, where we could listen to Beethoven, Brahms.
When Philip was in high school, he got his first regular job at University Radio. University Radio at that time was strictly radios, and then as time went on, they